Our headline stories this hour. The U.S. Air Force admits that September's deadly coalition strikes against Syrian forces were a mistake and that they would have continued for longer if the Russian military had not flagged it up. Saudi Arabia faces a tough task convincing fellow OPEC members Iran and Iraq to cut oil production in order to prop up its ailing economy. As the cartel meets in Vienna, we'll keep you updated on all the developments throughout Wednesday. We go to our correspondent in a matter of minutes. And a leading dictionary says the word of the year is paranoid after a spike in searches for it during 2016. We look at the trends that have been seen trust drop in institutions which people used to feel kept them safe. From Moscow to the world, this is RT International. My name's Ewan O'Neill. Good to have your company. Our top story this hour, the U.S. Air Force says coalition planes accidentally targeted the Syrian army in the city of Deir ez-Zor, and strikes would have continued if not for a call from the Russian military. That is the result of an investigation into the incident which occurred in September.
The strikes were conducted under a good faith belief that the strikes were targeting ISIL in accordance with the law of armed conflict.
The U.S. CENTCOM investigator said he found there was no intent to target Syrian forces. He said the U.S. military believed they were targeting ISIL. He said it was an unintentional, regrettable error. The investigator also came to the conclusion that the U.S. forces have not violated the laws of armed conflict. From the way CENTCOM presented this, prosecution seems very unlikely. We've seen this happen before when the Pentagon investigates a strike that went terribly wrong, like the bombing of the hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, decides it was unintentional and therefore not a crime. The U.S. airstrikes on September 17th in Deir ez-Zor, Syria, killed over 60 members of the Syrian military. It reportedly allowed ISIL to make advances in the area. They then had to be pushed back. Other details came up during the CENTCOM investigators' briefing. The U.S. CENTCOM investigator said that the strikes would have lasted longer and would have killed more people had there been no hotline contact between Russia and the U.S. on Syria. That hotline was established as part of efforts to prevent an accidental clash between Russian and American forces. Here's what I found striking in the CENTCOM investigators' report. There was an officially designated point of contact for the hotline. When Russia called to say that the coalition was hitting the wrong people, that hotline point of contact on the U.S. side was unavailable for 27 minutes. This is, mind you, a hotline between two major military powers established to avoid accidents. You would think every second would count. What the CENTCOM investigation also revealed was that the U.S. military called Russia in advance to notify of airstrikes in the area, but gave the wrong location. The investigator said 9 kilometers south of Deir ez-Zor. According to the CENTCOM, this was the first time the U.S. had notified Russia of its airstrikes in Syria in advance. But as we now find out, the wrong location was given in that notification. Many errors were apparently made that night on September 11th and throughout the days leading up to the strikes.
The Russians, for some time now, have been asking the United States to give pre-planned coordinates of where they plan to strike. And unfortunately, the United States has turned them down each time. And in this case, they gave the wrong coordinates. And I'm a little concerned as to where they got the coordinates from, because even though the report remains classified, I would suspect, and again, this is just my opinion, that the classified portion of that report basically was telling them that the information came from someone from one of the various groups the United States has been supporting, and took it at face value. And one of those groups clearly has it out against the government, and may have purposely given those coordinates.
However, it seems despite the miscommunication and lethal consequences, working with Russia is not on the Pentagon's mind.
Will the United States consider cooperating with Russia to validate targets on the ground in the future?
We have no plans at this point to cooperate with Russia in that way.
To another big story of the day, ministers from the oil-producing cartel OPEC are holding another crucial meeting in Vienna to discuss whether or not to cut output. And leading members, Saudi Arabia, may struggle to convince certain key nations to reduce production.
OPEC, the organization of the petroleum exporting countries, oversees a third of global oil production, and understandably, everyone wants a bite. These days, there's a life and death battle going on behind the scenes. It's waged between the de facto OPEC leader, Saudi Arabia, and two resurgent members, Iran and Iraq, both hungry for a slice of the cake. Saudi Arabia is heavily dependent on oil revenue and needs prices up and production cut. But Iraq says it needs more money to fight insurgents and ISIL, and will only sign up for a production freeze at best and not a cut. Iran, Saudi Arabia's geopolitical rival, wants to pump and then pump some more. Tehran has just returned to the oil market and wants pre-sanction levels of production. The revival of Iran's lost share in the oil market is the national will and demand of the Iranian people. Those words from the country's oil minister. So what's Saudi Arabia's response? Well, it's threatened to walk out of the deal, falling back on the old argument that the market will balance itself out. Some call it a bluff, but one thing is for certain: Iran and Iraq have little to lose.
Well, RT's Igor Piskunov is outside OPEC headquarters in Vienna right now, where oil ministers are arriving for the pivotal gathering. We cross live to Igor. Igor, so we have really the eyes of the financial world where you are right now, and it seems to be focusing on Saudi Arabia, who have a major challenge ahead today, don't they?
Well, definitely, there's a lot of attention being focused at this meeting taking place in that building behind me. That's OPEC's main headquarters here in Vienna. You can see that line of people at the entrance there. Those are all journalists, because there's a lot of hype around this meeting. There are a lot of expectations for OPEC to finally be able to reach an agreement on production levels. However, many are linking this year's rise and fall of oil prices to OPEC's previous promises and then failure to reach consensus. So far, during previous meetings, they've only been able to agree on freezing production, but not reducing it. Now, there's also the issue of how other players on the market will be reacting, non-OPEC members, such as the United States, for instance. And President-elect Donald Trump said he may be looking at easing regulation for American oil producers to be able to produce more, so that could bring more oil onto the market. That could affect the price. And then there's also the issue of how Russia will react and how Russia will act, because so far Moscow only agreed to freeze production, it seems, and it's a question if they'll be able to reduce, or they'll be able to agree to reduce production. So there are a lot of variables in this equation. Of course, we'll be closely watching this meeting taking place here in Vienna, and we'll be reporting all the latest details.
Yes, so many questions, not least how you're going to get to the top of that queue and get in time to see all what's happening. An important day. Igor Piskunov outside OPEC HQ in Vienna. Thank you. Well, we discussed the chances of OPEC members reaching a deal today with international oil economist Dr. Mamdouh Salameh. This is what he thinks.
There is a very good chance, I would say just over 50%, that they will reach an agreement for two reasons. The first is that members of OPEC are suffering, their economies are suffering very badly. And the second thing is that OPEC has to prove that it has still some influence in the international oil market. The world is focusing its attention on OPEC, and OPEC has to deliver. Otherwise, it will become, as I said many times, a non-entity in the global oil market. It will lose a lot of influence, and if they fail to agree, it will become more difficult to agree in another meeting.